What happens when the most powerful military on earth fight a war it cannot win? The Vietnam War was not just a battle between nations, it was a clash of ideologies, a test of endurance and turning point that reshaped global politics. From French colonial rule to the fall of Saigon, from jungle guerrilla warfare to protest in American streets, this conflict changed the course of the 20th century. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Might and Legacy channel. Mile. After that, leave a comment and tell us which other passionate topics would you like to hear about. Alright, let's go all the way to the end. The jungle does not whisper in Vietnam, it roars. Little blades slice through thick, humid air. The ground trembles beneath distant artillery. Smoke coils upward in dark columns that stain in the horizon. Somewhere beneath that canopy of tangled green, soldiers move cautiously, fingers tight on their triggers, scanning shadows that seem to breathe. The Vietnam War was not simply fought in open battlefields. It unfolded in a living labyrinth where the enemy could be anywhere or nowhere at all. How does a global superpower become trapped in a war it cannot clearly define, let alone win? In the mid-20th century, the world too stood divided between two competing visions, capitalism and communism. The Cold War was not yet cold in Asia. Instead, it burned through proxy conflicts, ideological rivalries, and fragile alliances. Vietnam would become the most volatile front in that struggle, but this was not originally a war between the United States and Vietnam. It began long before American boats touched Southeast Asian soil. It began under colonial rule when European empires carved up distant territories as extensions of their own wealth and prestige. Vietnam, along with Laos and Cambodia, formed French Indochina, a colony valued for its rice, rubber, and strategic position. For decades, France governed with authority, extracting resources and suppressing dissent. Yet beneath that surface control, something was growing. Nationalism spread quietly through villages and cities. Young intellectuals traveled abroad, absorbing revolutionary ideas. Farmers, displaced from their land, carried resentment like a hidden ember. The desire for independence did not explode overnight. It accumulated generation after generation. Then came the Second World War. France collapsed under German invasion. Imperial authority weakened. Japan occupied Indochina. Famine ravaged the countryside. Millions suffered, and in chaos, resistance movements organized with new urgency. By the time the United States entered Vietnam directly in the 1960s, the conflict that already evolved through layers of colonial struggle, revolution, and geopolitical maneuvering. American leaders framed it as a necessary stand against communist expansion. They feared a China reaction, the so-called domino effect, where one nation's fall would trigger others across Southeast Asia. But wars are rarely so simple. For American soldiers arriving in Vietnam, this was not a clear battlefield with visible front lines. It was a war of uncertainty. Villages that appeared peaceful by day could conceal insurgents by night. The Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army did not rely on overwhelming force. They relied on patience, terrain, and psychological endurance. They had fought foreign powers before and survived. Television cameras followed the war in ways never seen before. For the first time, living rooms in the United States witnessed combat footage almost in real time. The conflict was no longer distant or abstract. It entered home nightly, reshaping public opinion with every broadcast. This was not just a military confrontation. It was a test of ideology, perception, and willpower. And before American helicopters ever thundered across the sky, before Nepal lit the jungle in fire, before protests erupted on university campuses, thousands of miles away, the roots of this war had already sunk deep into history. To understand how the most powerful nation in the world became entangled in a struggle it could not control, we must travel backward to empire, to resistance, and to the first sparks of revolution in a colonized land. Long before American helicopters thundered over rice paddies, another empire believed Vietnam was securely under its control. In the late 19th century, France tightened its grip over Indochina, transforming Vietnam into a colonial possession that fed European industry. Rubber plantations expanded across confiscated farmland. Rice was exported in massive quantities. Railways and ports were built not for Vietnamese prosperity, but for imperial efficiency. On the surface, it looked like modernization. Beneath it, exploitation had turned into daily reality. Peasants lost ancestral lands, taxes increased, education favored a small elite loyal to French authority. Political dissent was not debated, it was crushed. Yet colonial rule always carries a paradox. The more tightly it controls, the more resistance it breeds. Young Vietnamese thinkers began asking dangerous questions. If France spoke of liberty and equality in Europe, why deny those same principles in Asia? If the 20th century promised self-determination, why were millions still governed by foreign decree? Among those absorbing these contradictions was a man who would become central to Vietnam's future, Ho Chi Minh. But he did not begin as a mythical revolutionary. He was one of many who left Vietnam in search of answers. He traveled through France, the United Kingdom, the United States, and even eventually the Soviet Union, studying political theory and revolutionary movement. He witnessed firsthand how colonial powers justified domination while preaching freedom. The hypocrisy was not abstract, it was personal. During the First World War, thousands of Vietnamese were sent to Europe as laborers and soldiers under French command. They worked in factories, drug trenches, and witnessed the rhetoric of democracy being defended on battlefields far from home. When the war ended, they returned to Vietnam expecting reform. Instead, colonial control tightened. The disappointment radicalized many. In 1930, the Indochinese Communist Party was founded. It was not merely a political organization, it was a framework for coordinated resistance. Strikes erupted, demonstrations spread, France responded with arrests, executions, and imprisonment. But repression did not extinguish the movement, it refined it. Then came a global earthquake, the Second World War. When Germany defeated France, colonial authority fractured. Japan moved swiftly into Indochina, occupying the territory while allowing French administrators to remain. For the Vietnamese people, this meant double subjection. Resources were extracted to support the Japanese war effort. Reshaped intensified even as famine loomed, and the famine did come. By 1945, starvation devastated northern Vietnam. Millions perished. Fields were stripped bare. Families disintegrated under hunger, while occupying powers argued over military logistics. Ordinary Vietnamese built their dead. In that vacuum of legitimacy, resistance transformed into momentum. Ho Chi Minh and his allies formed the Viet Minh, a broad nationalist coalition aiming to expel both French and Japanese authority. They did not rely solely on ideology. They distributed food. They organized communities. They built trust among peasants who had been abandoned by every ruling power. When Japan surrendered at the end of the Second World War, a window opened, a rare and fragile moment when empire faltered. The question was no longer whether Vietnam desired independence. The question was whether the world powers would allow it. Because as the colonial authority weakened, new global tensions were rising. The United States and the Soviet Union were emerging as rival superpowers. The Cold War had not yet fully ignited, but its shadow was stretching across Asia. Vietnam's struggle for independence was about to become entangled in something far greater than colonial resistance. When empires collapsed, they rarely fall quietly. In 1945, the world was in ruins. Germany had surrendered. Japan stood on the brink of defeat. Across Asia, colonial structures trembled as occupying forces weakened. In Vietnam, that instability created something rare in history, a vacuum of power, and vacuums do not remain empty for long. The Japanese occupation had already fractured French authority. Then famines swept through northern Vietnam with devastating force. Crops were requisitioned, supply chains collapsed, villages emptied, millions died of starvation, while imperial administrators prioritized war logistics. In that catastrophe, the legitimacy of foreign rule disintegrated completely. The Vietnamese understood the moment. They had spent years organizing in secrecy, training fighters, building local networks, distributing land, and earning loyalty from rural communities. They were not merely an armed group. They were becoming a parallel government. When Japan surrendered after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the balance tipped. In August 1945, coordinated uprising erupted across the country. Government buildings were seized. Local authorities were disarmed. Hanoi fell quickly. What began as scattered insurrection became a national revolution in a matter of days. On September 2, 1945, in Hanoi's Baden Square, independence was declared. Before a massive crowd, Ho Chi Minh proclaimed the rebirth of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam in a calculated gesture aimed at international legitimacy. He quoted from the American Declaration of Independence, invoking principles of liberty and self-determination. It was a bold move. The message was clear. Vietnam was not merely a communist experiment. It was a nation claiming the same rights that Western democracies championed. But revolutions are rarely settled by declarations alone. France, humiliated by its earlier defeat in Europe, had no intention of surrendering its colonial empire. The Paris Indochina was not just territory, it was prestige, economic leverage, and proof that France remained a global power. Negotiations faltered, trust dissolved, tensions escalated. In the north and south, armed clashes began to spirit. French forces returned, establishing control over key cities. What had seemed like a triumphant birth of independence now looked fragile and contested, and the world was changing. The alliance that had defeated the Axis powers was dissolving. Suspicion between the United States and the Soviet Union intensified. Communism was no longer just an ideology. It was a geopolitical threat in the eyes of Western policymakers. As the Cold War emerged, Vietnam's revolution was reinterpreted not simply as anti-colonial nationalism, but as part of a broader communist expansion. Vietnam found itself caught between two historical tides, the collapse of empire and the rise of superpower rivalry. The First Indochina War had begun. France believed its professional army and superior weaponry would quickly suppress the uprising. The Vietnamese understood they could not win through direct confrontation. Instead, they embraced patience, mobility, and attrition. Every jungle path became a battlefield, every village a potential stronghold. This was no longer a revolution in celebration. It was a war of endurance, and in a remote valley, surrounded by mountains, a confrontation was approaching that would shatter colonial illusion once and for all. There are battles that decide wars, and then there are battles that end empires. In 1954, deep in a remote valley in northwestern Vietnam, the French military command believed it had found the perfect trap. DNB and PU lay surrounded by mountains accessible by air, isolated from major population centers. French strategists assumed the Vietnamese would be forced into a conventional assault, an open battle where artillery, aircraft, and entrenched defenses would guarantee French superiority. It was a calculation built on confidence and on misunderstanding. General von Nguyen Giap, commander of the Vietnamese forces, understood that direct confrontation in the open would mean annihilation. So he refused to fight the battle the French expected. Instead, he redefined it. For weeks, thousands of Vietnamese soldiers and civilians moved through dense jungle and steep mountains under cover of darkness. They dismantled artillery pieces, carried them by hand, and bicycled across nearly impossible terrain, and disassembled them high above the valley. Supplies traveled through narrow footpaths. Camouflage concealed every position. Patience became a weapon. From the valley floor, French officers looked up at the surrounding hills and saw nothing threatening until the guns began to fire. In March 1954, artillery hunted down from the mountains, shocking the French garrison. Airstrips were destroyed. Supply drops became erratic. Defensive positions collapsed under relentless bombardment. What was supposed to be a fortress became a cage. The siege stretched on for weeks. Rain turned trenches into mud-filled graves. French soldiers, exhausted and cut off, fought with downring ammunition. Reinforcement could not break through. Morale deteriorated as the realization set in. They had been outmaneuvered. The Vietnamese tightened the noose methodically. They dug trenches closer and closer to French positions, advancing underground and above ground in coordinated waves. Every meter gained was paid for in blood, but strategy was working. He had transformed a colonial stronghold in a symbol of resistance. On May 7, 1954, Dien Bien Phu fell. The defeat stunned France. It was not just a battlefield loss, it was psychological collapse. A European colonial army had been decisively beaten by a revolutionary force from a colonized nation. The illusion of invincibility shattered in Modi Valley, thousands of miles from Paris. Negotiations flowed swiftly at the Geneva Conference. International powers sought to contain the fallout. Vietnam would be temporarily divided along the 17th parallel. The North would be governed by Ho Chi Minh's communist leadership. The South would remain under a non-communist administration supported by Western powers. National worldwide elections were scheduled to reunify the country within 2 years. Temporary division, they called it, but history rarely respects temporary lines. The United States watched the outcome of the NBNU with growing concern. France has failed to stop communist expansion in Southeast Asia. In Washington, policymakers feared that if Vietnam unified under communist leadership, neighboring countries might follow. So-called domino theory gained momentum. The French Empire retreated. But the conflict did not end. It simply changed the hand. In the divided land of Vietnam, two competing visions of the future were hardening. And a new superpower was preparing to step into the vacuum left behind. What happens when a country is split into two and told to wait for unity that may never come? After the Geneva Accords, Vietnam was no longer a single nation struggling against colonial rule. It was two competing states separated by an invisible line that cut through villages, families, and futures. The 17th parallel was meant to be temporary, a military demarcation until nationwide elections could reunify the country. But in the atmosphere of rising Cold War tension, temporary solutions hardened into permanent realities. In the North, Ho Chi Minh consolidated power. Land reforms reshaped rural ownership. Communist ideology guided governance. The Democratic Republic of Vietnam aligned closely with the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China, presenting itself as the legitimate representative of Vietnamese independence. In the South, a different experiment unfolded, and God DM, backed by the United States, emerged as the leader of the Republic of Vietnam. Washington saw him as a bulwark against communism, a figure who could destabilize the region and prevent the feared domino effect. If Vietnam fell, offshores argued Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, even Indonesia might follow. But DM's government was fragile from the beginning. He concentrated power tightly, sidelining the political opponents, and relied heavily on family members in key positions. His administration favored certain religious groups while alienating others, particularly the Buddhist majority. Rural reforms raged. Corruption spread quietly through the system. For many in the countryside, the promises of stability rang hollow, and the elections scheduled for 1956, they never happened. The United States and South Vietnamese leadership feared Ho Chi Minh would win the CCV in unified vote. Cancelling the election was presented as a safeguard against communism. But to many Vietnamese, it confirmed that political unity would not come through ballots, it would come through force. In the southern countryside, resistance movement reorganized. By the late 1950s, the National Liberation Front emerged, known in the West as the Viet Cong, composed of southern insurgents supported by the North. They blended into villages. They created farmers and carried out assassinations and sabotage against government officials. This was no longer a conventional war, it was a shadow war. South Vietnamese forces struggled to contain the insurgency. American military advisors began arriving in greater numbers, training troops and offering logistical support. At first, Washington framed its involvement as limited assistance, but each year the commitment deepened. Meanwhile, instability in the South worsened. Political dissent grew louder. Buddhist monks protested discrimination. Images of self-immolation shocked the world, exposing the region's fragility. In 1963, with thirsty approval from American officials, Diem was overthrown and assassinated in a military coup. The removal of Diem was supposed to stabilize the situation. Instead, it opened the door to chaos. Successive governments rose and fell in rapid succession. Leadership fractured. The Viet Cong expanded their influence across rural provinces, and in Washington, policymakers faced an unsettling reality. The South government they were trying to defend was collapsing from within. The conflict was no longer contained, it was accelerating. Then, in 1964, an incident in the waters of the Gulf of Tonkin would change everything, transforming advisory support into open war. Can overwhelming power guarantee victory if the battlefield refuses to behave? In 1964, reports emerged that American naval vessels had been attacked in the Gulf of Tonkin by North Vietnam's patrol boats. The details were disputed. The second alleged attack, later questioned, but the political impact was immediate. The United States Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution granting President Lyndon B. Johnson broad authority to use military force in Southeast Asia. What had been a limited advisory role was about to become full-scale war. By 1965, United States Marines were landing on Vietnamese soil. Convoys rolled through coastal cities. Helicopters filled the skies. Military planners in Washington believed that advancing technology, air superiority, and disciplined infantry would overwhelm insurgent forces. It seemed logical. The most powerful military machine in the world against a developing nation fractured by decades of war. But Vietnam was not a conventional battlefield. The enemy did not line up in formation. The Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army relied on guerrilla tactics, defined over years of anti-colonial struggle. They avoided direct confrontation. They struck supply lines. They planted improvised explosives. They disappeared into dense jungle or sympathetic villages. The jungle itself became an adversary. Heat suffocated patrols. Monsoon rains turned terrain into mud. Insects carried the disease. Visibility was limited to a few meters beneath thick vegetation. Every step forward carried uncertainty. American troops operated under constant psychological pressure, never fully knowing who was friend or foe. In response, the United States escalated its strategy. Operation Rolling Thunder began, a sustained bombing campaign against North Vietnam intended to infrastructure and break morale. Thousands of tons of explosives fell from the sky. Brigades collapsed, railways shattered, factories burned. Alongside the conventional bombs came chemical agents like napalm and Agent Orange deployed to strip foliage and expose hidden supply routes. But the Ho Chi Minh Trail endured. This intricate network of paths stretching through Laos and Cambodia functioned as the lifeline of the communist forces. Even under relentless bombardment, supplies flowed south. Roads were rebuilt overnight. Convoys moved under camouflage. Determination compensated for technological disparity. On the ground, military success became measured by body count, an attempt to quantify progress in a war without clear front lines. Yet, each reported victory felt hollow. Situated villages could revert to insurgent control within days. Territory held by daylight may vanish by nightfall, and back home, the war was no longer distant. Television networks broadcast images of combat, wounded soldiers, and burning villages directly into American living rooms. For the first time in history, a major war unfolded in near real time before the public. Optimistic statements from officials clashed with stark visual evidence. The psychological battlefield was shifting. In Vietnam, American forces faced an opponent willing to endure staggering losses for long-term objectives. In the United States, support for the war began erode under the weight of mounting casualties and unclear progress. Still, military leaders assured the public that victory was within reach. The enemy, they insisted, was weakening. But in the shadows, preparations were underway of an offensive that would shatter that narrative completely. If a war is nearly won, why does the enemy strike everywhere at once? By late 1967, American officials projected confidence more than 500,000 United States troops were deployed in Vietnam. Military briefings emphasized progress. Enemy casualties were high. Intelligence assessment suggested that communist forces were losing their ability to sustain large-scale operations. In Washington, optimism hardened into public messaging. The end was in sight. But in war, perception can be more fragile than reality. On January 30, 1968, during the Lunar New Year holiday known as Tet, a period traditionally marked by ceasefire and family gathering, The North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong launched a coordinated assault across South Vietnam. More than 100 cities and military installations were targeted simultaneously. The scale was staggering. Guerrilla fighters infiltrated urban centers, long considered secure in Saigon. Explosions echoed near the presidential palace. In Hub, intense street battles erupted. Most shockingly, insurgents breached the United States Embassy compound in the capital, engaging American forces in direct combat within what had been presented as a safe zone. Television cameras captured it all. Though the attackers were eventually repelled and suffered heavy casualties, the psychological damage was immediate. The offensive demonstrated that despite years of bombing and troop deployment, the communist forces retained the capacity to coordinate massive operations. If the enemy had been the verge of collapse, how could this happen? Militarily, the Tet offensive was costly for the North. Thousands of fighters were killed. Many urban networks were dismantled. In terms of battlefield objectives, the offensive failed to ignite the widespread uprising the communists had hoped for. But wars are not decided only by territory. In American living rooms, viewers watched images of fierce combat contradicting offshore assurances. The narrative of inevitable victory fractured. Journalists began questioning military strategy more openly. One of the most influential news anchors in the United States publicly concluded that the conflict appeared unwinnable without escalation beyond acceptable limits. Confidence shifted into doubt. Protests intensified across American cities. University campuses became centers of anti-war activism. Demonstrations grew larger and more confrontational. Families questioned the purpose of sending young men to fight in a distant jungle without clear objectives. Even within the military morale faltered. Soldiers faced the realization that the war was not approaching closure. It was deepening in complexity. President Lyndon B. Johnson, under mounting political and social pressure, announced that he would not seek re-election. The Tet Offensive had not defeated American forces in combat, but it had altered the war's trajectory irreversibly. The battlefields in Vietnam remained contested, yet the political battlefield in the United States had begun to tilt. The question was no longer how to win decisively. The question had become how to live. How does a superpower step away from a war it once promised to win? After the shock of the Tet Offensive, the United States faced a strategic crossroads. The conflict in Vietnam had consumed years, lives, and political capital. Public trust in official narratives had eroded. The next president, Richard Nixon, entered office in a pledge to achieve peace with honor. It was a phrase careful chosen, suggesting withdrawal without humiliation, dissolution without surrender. Nixon introduced a policy called Vietnamization. The strategy aimed to gradually transfer combat responsibilities to the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, while American troops withdrew in phases. On paper, it offered a path out: reduce U.S. casualties, strengthen South Vietnamese forces, and maintain a non-communist government in Saigon. But transition during the war is rarely smooth. While troop numbers decreased, American air power intensified. Bombing campaigns expanded beyond Vietnam's borders into Laos and Cambodia, targeting supply routes along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. These operations were meant to pressure North Vietnam into negotiations, but they also widened the conflict geographically and politically. At home, opposition surged. In 1970, protests erupted after news of the Cambodian incursions. Demonstrations spread across college campuses. At Kent State University, National Guard troops opened fire on student protesters, killing 4. The war was no longer distant. It had ignited tension within American streets. Meanwhile, in Southeast Asia, the balance remained fragile. South Vietnamese forces, though heavily equipped, struggled to match the discipline and cohesion of their northern counterparts. Corruption, internal divisions, and declining morale weakened defensive lines. Each American withdrawal reduced the buffer protecting the southern government. Diplomatic talks continued in Paris. Years of negotiation followed cycles of optimism and collapse. Finally, in 1973, the Paris Peace Accord was signed. The agreement called for a ceasefire and the complete withdrawal of the United States forces. American prisoners of war returned home. Officially, direct American involvement ended, but the war did not end. Without sustained American military presence, South Vietnam stood increasingly isolated. North Vietnamese forces regrouped and prepared for decisive air action. In early 1975, a major offensive began. Provinces in the Central Highlands fell rapidly. Defensive positions crumbled faster than expected. Panic spread through the southern command structure. City after city collapsed. By April, North Vietnamese forces were approaching Saigon. The capital braced for siege, but resistance proved brief. On April 30, 1975, tanks rolled through the gates of the presidential palace. The flag of North Vietnam was raised above the city. The images that followed became symbols of a historical turning point. Helicopters hovered over rooftop, evacuating diplomats and desperate Vietnamese armies. Crowds surged toward the American embassy, seeking escape. It was not the orderly withdrawal once envisioned. It was urgency, chaos, and finality. The war that had drawn in the world's most powerful military ended not with triumphal ceremony, but with hurried departure. Vietnam was unified under communist leadership. For the United States, the conflict marked its first clear military defeat in modern history. But wars do not conclude with signatures or flags alone. Their consequences echo for generations. When the shooting stops, does the war truly end? On paper, Vietnam was unified in 1976 under the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. The decades-long struggle against colonial rule and foreign intervention had culminated in political victory for the North. But unity did not erase division overnight. It did not rebuild shattered cities. It did not heal psychological wounds covered by years of relentless violence. For many in the former South Vietnam, the fall of Saigon marked not liberation but uncertainty. The new government moved swiftly to consolidate authority. Former officials, soldiers, and perceived collaborators were sent to re-education camps. Some remained there for years. Private businesses were nationalized. Land and industry were reorganized under socialist policies. In theory, this restructuring aimed to reshape society along revolutionary principles. In practice, it produced hardship and fear for many families who had aligned with the previous regime. Hundreds of thousands fled. They escaped by sea in fragile, overcrowded boats, navigating unpredictable waters in search of refuge. These refugees became known as the boat people. Many perished from storms, starvation, or piracy. Those who survived carried with them stories of loss, displacement, and survival. The war's conclusion had created a new humanitarian crisis. Vietnam itself was devastated. Entire regions lay contaminated by unexploded ordnance. Farmland had been scorched. Forests stripped by chemical defoliant struggle to recover infrastructure from bridges to schools had been reduced to rubble. A generation had grown up surrounded by conflict. Another generation had been lost entirely. For years, Vietnam faced diplomatic isolation. The United States imposed a trade embargo that lasted into the 1990s. Reconstruction was slow, constrained by limited resources and global political tension. Yet over time, gradual reforms opened the economy. Markets revived, cities expanded. The country began a steady transformation into one of Southeast Asia's fastest growing economies. The war's legacy, however, extended far beyond Vietnamese borders. In the United States, more than 58,000 service members had died. Hundreds of thousands returned home physically wounded or psychologically scared. Many veterans struggled with trauma long before the term post-traumatic stress disorder entered public vocabulary. Unlike yearly wars, there were no widespread parades or unified celebration. The conflict had fractured public opinions so deeply that returning soldiers often encountered silence, division, or indifference. Trust in government institutions declined sharply. The Vietnam War reshaped American foreign policy. Leaders became more cautious about prolonged ground engagement without clear objectives. The so-called Vietnam Syndrome influenced military planning for decades. A reluctance to commit large numbers of troops without overwhelming public support and defined exit strategies. Yet history has a way of repeating its dilemmas. Later conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan revived uncomfortable comparisons. Questions about insurgents, nation building, and the limit of military power resurfaced. The shadow of Vietnam lingered in strategic debates and public discourse. The war had begun as a fight against colonial domination. It had evolved into a Cold War battleground. It ended as a reminder that military superiority does not guarantee policy success, but beyond strategy and geopolitics lies something deeper human memory. In Vietnam and in the United States, monuments that not as celebrations of victory, but as acknowledgement of sacrifice and complexity. The conflict defies simple narratives of triumph or defeat. It remains a story of resilience, miscalculation, ideology, and endurance. And even decades later, one question continues to echo. What is the true cost of a war fought for from home? And can its lessons ever be fully learned? Did the Vietnam War truly end in 1975, or did it simply change shape? History often treats wars as closed chapters marked by surrender, deaths, and peace agreements. But Vietnam refuses to remain confined to the past. Its legacy stretches forward into military doctrine, political caution, media influence, and the global understanding of power itself. For the United States, Vietnam was a turning point that reshaped strategic thinking. Before Vietnam, the assumption was clear. Superior firepower and economic strength would determine outcomes. After Vietnam, that certainty fractured. Military planners began emphasizing defined objectives, coalition building, and overwhelming force to avoid prolonged stalemate. The war also changed how government communicate with their people. Television had brought the battlefield into American homes in unprecedented ways. Graphic footage and frontline reporting blurred the line between distant conflict and domestic reality. Public opinion became an active variable in military engagement. Leaders could no longer rely solely on official statements. Citizens could see the war unfolding for themselves. Vietnam altered journalism, politics, and civil-military relations permanently. Internationally, the conflict demonstrated the limit of conventional power against determined insurgents. A small nation, diverging terrain, ideology, and passions had resisted one of the strongest militaries in history. The lesson was not that technology is irrelevant, but that it cannot substitute for legitimacy and local support. For Vietnam, the decade following reunification brought hardship, but also adaptation. Economic reforms in the late 20th century gradually opened markets and strengthened trade partnerships, including, ironically, with the United States. Former enemies established diplomatic relations, trade flourished, cooperation expanded in areas once defined by hostility. History does not erase conflict, but it evolves beyond it. The jungles that once echoed with artillery now host glowing cities and manufacturing hubs. The country that endured relentless bombing campaigns has become a major economic player in Southeast Asia. The United States, once divided by the war, now maintains complex diplomatic and economic ties with its former adversary. Yet memory remains powerful. Memorials in Washington, Hanoi, and across Vietnam stand not as triumphal monuments, but as spaces of reflection, names carved into Blackstone walls. Photographies are saved in museums, personal stories passed between generations. The Vietnam War resists simple classification as victory or defeat. It remains a study in complexity. It began as a struggle against colonialism. It transformed into a Cold War battleground. It concluded as a cautionary tale about intervention, ideology, and the unpredictable nature of resistance and its questions endure. Can foreign powers reshape distant nations without understanding their history? Can military might override political reality? Can a war truly be won if the population loses faith in it. Vietnam teaches that power has limit, that endurance can outweigh dominance, that wars fought in distant lands can fracture societies at home. It reminds us that history is not just a record of events, but a mirror of reflecting choices, consequences, and human resilience. The helicopters may have lifted off decades ago, but the echoes still resonate. The Vietnam War was more than a chapter in the Cold War. It was a defining test of ideology, strategy, and national will. It revealed the complexity of modern warfare, where technology and numbers alone cannot guarantee success. It exposed the human cost behind geopolitical calculations and forced the nations to confront uncomfortable truths about intervention and power. Vietnam emerged scared yet sovereign. The United States emerged wounded yet introspective. And the world learned, do not always permanently, that wars shaped by ideology can spiral beyond expectation. History does not offer easy answers, but it does offer perspective. And Vietnam stands as one of its most enduring lessons. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this video and are passionate about this type of content, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming videos and discover more fascinating stories. See you in the next video.